Hello and welcome to Spencer's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to talk about 5 classics that deserve new, good TV or film adaptations. I am not the biggest fan of movies. For one, I have a very short attention span, but also I have something called prosopagnosia, which is also known as face blindness, and it simply means that I cannot distinguish faces very well. That is a problem in real life. I actually made a whole video about this a while ago. I'll link that in the description box. But it is 10 times worse in period dramas where everyone is wearing hats or bonnets or the hair up in a bun so that I just simply cannot tell people apart. Other than that, I quite like a good adaptation. I think that it's a different way of experiencing a classic work of fiction. And I personally have never seen an adaptation that has actually ruined a classic for me or made it worse, even if the adaptation itself was terrible. So a few days ago, I saw this tweet shared onto my timeline. And this got me very excited. Now, I don't know this producer, and I have personally very little opinion on the casting of Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie, but I was excited because The Canterville Ghost, a short story by my favorite classics author Oscar Wilde, is a story that I have thought for a very long time would make an excellent new adaptation. So this news made me very happy, and it made me think about classics that I love and classics that I don't love that I think deserve new and good adaptations. All 5 stories that I'm talking about today have been adapted at least once. None of these are so obscure that they have not been adapted to film at all. At the end of that list, though, I will mention one wild card that hasn't been adapted, that I don't think ever will get adapted, but that I would nonetheless love to see as a film. So the first story that I want to talk about is The Canterville Ghost by Oscar Wilde. This was one of his earlier stories, and the reason I think it would make a great adaptation is because it has a very appealing mix of comedy, tragedy, and a huge amount of sentimentality that I think would appeal really well to audiences of television and films. This is a story of an American family moving into an old, abandoned, haunted house in England. The story is told both from their perspective and from that of the actual ghost. It is a clash of culture story. You have this super pragmatic, modern American family that are confronted with the ghost of a very Englishman who does not appreciate these new visitors in his ancestral home that he has haunted for centuries. So the setup is very funny. The entire story starts off hilariously funny, and then it shifts into the melodramatic as we get a little bit of the backstory of the ghost, and as he strikes up a friendship with one of the family members that eventually has quite deep effects on both of them. So I personally am very excited to see this new version. I think it's a bit of a shame that it looks to be fully animated. I would have loved to see a live action, obviously with a lot of CGI, but I still think that this would appeal to our 21st century sense of humor and entertainment. So I shall be expecting this adaptation with anticipation, and I'll probably talk about it again on this channel when the film is out. The second book that I would like to see adapted, and I don't think this will surprise any viewers of my channel, is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. This is my least favorite of Jane Austen's books. I only reread it last year. You can watch my reaction to it, but maybe you don't want to watch that video if you're very attached to Mansfield Park. I didn't really like it that much. But it is notable that this is the only Jane Austen work without a really outstanding adaptation behind it. The last attempt, the just dreadful ITV version. I cringe even thinking about it. I love Billie Piper, but what is she doing in that adaptation? It was a terrible production all around. And a lot of people seem to be of the opinion that Mansfield Park is unadaptable because of its quiet nature, because of its thoughtful, introspective, and shy main protagonist, because of the lack of passion and romance that we get in other Austen novels. But I think there could be a way of making this into a really fantastic movie, or even better, a really fantastic 4 or 6 part miniseries. Let Fanny Price be quiet and introspective and thoughtful. Find a way of showing that on screen without changing her personality. You don't need an exuberant, lively main character when there are other characters in the book that can fill that role. I'm thinking in particular, of course, of the charismatic Crawford siblings, who really bring that sort of main protagonist sparkle without being the main protagonists of the story. Perhaps even you could make an adaptation that does shift the focus a little bit more onto them, that maybe follows several of the characters. I can see a completely new take on Mansfield Park that focuses on 4 people: Fanny Price, Mr. and Miss Crawford, and Maria Bertram. These 4 all have their own unique arcs, and I think a production that focused on those 4 could be incredibly fascinating to watch, because then you get all of the aspects that we love in Jane Austen. You get the romance, the scandal, the passion, the social criticism, the introspection, and I guess the morality, all embodied by these 4 different people, instead of just trying to make Fanny Price a Austen-esque heroine when she is so very different from the other Austen main characters. I have not argued this passionately on behalf of Mansfield Park in my life, and I probably never shall again. The next book is one that I have spoken about many times and very passionately, and that is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is made for a 21st century bombastic production. If there is any filmmaker watching, my message would be: stop making adaptations of Wuthering Heights and make adaptations of Tenant of Wildfell Hall instead. It has the same irresistible mix of a moody country setting, but it also has the glamour and darkness of London. It has broken relationships at the center. It deals with subjects that are so important that we talk about in the 21st century. Serious subjects: abuse, terrible relationships, friendships that go awry, oppression and abuse of power, and the helplessness that many in our society feel when faced against a system designed to work against them. We get all of this in an incredibly personal story. The novel itself is written in diary form, and so you get first-person account of the main character and her pain and suffering, but also her love and her fight for independence and her fight for self-determination. All of that in a movie would work incredibly well, in my opinion. You have an incredibly modern Victorian story with an incredibly modern Victorian protagonist and an incredibly modern but Victorian plot. I don't understand why filmmakers are sleeping on this, because this story is just waiting to be told to a new audience. We move into the 20th century for a, again, not very surprising pick. You've heard me talk about this book a lot of times, and that is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. And this was last adapted in the early 2000s, I believe, with Romola Garai, who is an amazing actress. I have not seen the early 2000s production, but I'm still going to argue for you over there, Hollywood producer who's definitely watching this video, for you to make a new one. I Capture the Castle is a young adult story before young adult novels were a thing. It's a coming-of-age tale that has all of the components that we love about contemporary young adult stories. It's got some interesting family dynamics and tensions, it's got romance, and again, it's got that sort of glamorous part of living in a castle. Although, of course, in this case, the castle itself is falling apart. It lends itself to a beautifully aesthetic movie about a witty and headstrong and independent 17-year-old girl and the incredibly eccentric life that she leads with her family in her castle. What I'm picturing is your typical sort of modern movie made for young audiences, but set in the 1930s, which is where the original novel is set. A Cab to the Castle is, for me, the perfect springtime read, and I think it would make the perfect summer movie as well. And finally, another 20th century classic that I think deserves to be adapted again, even though it has been adapted many times, is 1984 by George Orwell. This is a story that I think you could easily do a new production every decade, and every production would bring something different to the table. The book is so successful because in the decades since it has been published, we have all been able to recognize our own society in it, at least parts of it. I'm not suggesting we are living in the world of 1984 because I am not that kind of hyperbolic. But reading it, you do recognize aspects of your own life, aspects of your own society in the dystopian nightmare that 1984 portrays. And I think this is one book where I would like to see a modernized version of it. I would like to see the same story as the book retold, but perhaps in a more modern setting, bringing in new aspects of dystopian fears that we have today that George Orwell didn't have in the 40s when he wrote the book. So I think this is one where I would advocate for a looser adaptation of the story, one that takes the book as a jumping off point and then brings in things that are relevant to us now in 2021. Because the characters of the novel 1984 can be very easily transplanted into a modern setting and a new fresh take on the story, in my opinion. And now finally, as promised, my adaptation wildcard, a story that I am pretty certain will not be made in my lifetime, but that I would love to see. And that is a rather obscure Victorian novel. The book is called Gloriana, or The Revolution of 1900, and it is by Lady Florence Dixie. Despite its title being The Revolution of 1900, this book was published in 1890, and it is in fact a feminist utopian novel that takes the idea of a woman becoming a prime minister and creating an egalitarian society. The novel itself is Victorian sensationalism at its best, with a proto-feminist twist. There's so much silliness in this book. There's chases and murders and secret plots and imprisonment and breaking out of imprisonment, while having this really passionate argument for social and gender equality. It's silly, it's camp, but it's also revolutionary for its time and super fascinating to read as a 21st century feminist. If you haven't read Gloriana, you might want to put this on your TBR for Victober, but I would love to see that adapted into a film or TV show. I don't think it ever will. First of all, it's way too uplifting, being a utopian story, and it's also much too obscure to draw any significant audiences. Now I want to know from you, which novel or otherwise classic story do you think is long overdue a new good adaptation? And do you have a wildcard as well? Do you have a really silly suggestion that you don't think is ever going to be made, but you want to tell everyone about it, just in case there are any big Hollywood producers lurking in the comment section? You never know. Thank you for watching. Bye.